Gonna be honest, I think I love Final Fantasy VII. Okay, so I went out and I actually got the deluxe edition of Final Fantasy VII. As you can see, this is the original right here. Scroll that down there. And, you know, I was thinking that maybe I'll get like an art book, or that'll probably be it. Especially if I'm paying, you know, $10 extra for a copy of Final Fantasy VII. But I was pleasantly surprised when I was actually not only got an art book, but I got a little mini soundtrack. And a little steel book thing that has old Sephiroth on it. Well, I'm gonna be honest, this has nothing to do with the review at all, so ignore all of this.
Hope you will continue to help me gather vital information for my research.
Well, alright, let me actually get into the video of Final Fantasy VII. Let me actually talk about the game itself. Pretty much all you have played it by now, which means I can say spoilers without, you know, feeling bad about it, considering that the game also came out many years ago, if we're counting the original. But this remake is more of a reboot, or kind of a reimagining, but I'll get to that in a second. But first off, I just want to say that I really enjoyed this remake. I actually thought it was fantastic, and it was actually a Final Fantasy game that I plumply enjoyed. I haven't enjoyed a Final Fantasy game in a long time, as much as I enjoyed this. I think the last one was Final Fantasy X, maybe, and that was possibly it. Maybe the original Final Fantasy VII. But somebody who hasn't... Oh, and Final Fantasy The City I really like. Talk about the PSP version, not whatever that other crap that came out for the PS3. Anywho, I played a number of Final Fantasy titles, and we all know that they're not really connected. They all have their own intricate stories, you know, unless they have a sequel behind it, like Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy 13, when it's a couple of sequels there. And if we count the Dissidia, I guess you could say Dissidia is kind of a sequel to basically all the Final Fantasies. And as much of a spectacle Final Fantasy has tried to be ever since Final Fantasy 13, I wasn't really on board with it that much. I thought 13 was okay, you know. Like I said, possibly my favorite one up until now, you know, now being the Final Fantasy VII Remake, was Final Fantasy X, and then before then was possibly the original Final Fantasy VII, which I'm going to come out and say this, I've never beaten. I know how the game ends, I know about all the stuff that happens in the story, you know, and then of course I beat, you know, Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, and then you have also Final Fantasy VII Before Crisis, and a number of other Final Fantasy VII titles and projects, such as Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. We can go all into all of that. Final Fantasy VII is definitely the most popular and has the deepest lore. Which it should, because Final Fantasy VII is absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, it can get overwhelming or slightly overrated at times. Advent Children. Anywho, I haven't really been on board with Final Fantasy in a while. If you've been on my channel before, you know about even a few years back, or possibly less, I've talked about Final Fantasy 15 and how I thought it was a bit of a disappointment. Not saying that the game was bad. I thought the gameplay was actually really enjoyable. Definitely has that Kingdom Hearts feel. You can feel Nomura's hands being on it, even though he wasn't the director of it as he was in this one. We're going to talk a little bit more how Final Fantasy VII Remake has way more of a Kingdom Hearts influence on it compared to 15. But 15, whereas maybe the beginning was actually setting a high standard, the middle portion was kind of dull, and the ending was, I don't know whether to say it was absolutely brilliant or just downright stupid, but it wasn't forgettable. Like, I still remember the ending. Regardless of what DLCs came out after that, I didn't play a single one of them because I didn't care. I really did wanted Final Fantasy 15 to be better. I just actually thought it was okay overall. And then we have Final Fantasy VII Remake that came out, which was, well, was doing what Final Fantasy 15 was, but better. And with characters that I'm familiar with, but whose personalities have been fleshed out a little bit more, even more so than the other projects, such as Crisis Core and Advent Children. But there are some characters that don't appear from Crisis Core in here. You know, I always wondered what happened to certain characters that was in Crisis Core. It's kind of weird. You know, there's about 1 or 2 characters that don't pop up anymore. Anyway, you know, we're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into the whole lore and everything. But how the way this game ends, it definitely is opening up to other possibilities in the Final Fantasy universe, especially 7. Now, far as what I love about the game, okay, we can talk about graphics all day. I can still look back at Final Fantasy 13 and be like, wow, those graphics are really amazing. It's just, Square-Enix has always been good at that, especially when it comes to the Final Fantasy series or the Kingdom Hearts series, so let's just skip from that. Let's just, that's a given. That's a given. We already know that's a given. Gameplay-wise, now here's where it can sort of split the fan base, but it seems like everyone's relatively okay with this. The gameplay is very similar to Kingdom Hearts, with a mixture of Final Fantasy 15 in terms of it being done in real time. But I like the slowdown effect as it gives you as you use the command menu. This causes you to actually think of a strategy that you want to do next, as it does this whole slow motion effect. It's really cool, and adds a bit of tactics to it, but not as much as, you know, a turn-based thing would do. But as I feel as time goes forward and as we go towards the future, that they should continue to do something new and continue to evolve the combat, or actually bring it into a new form. And I think this game does it really well, doing that whole action, real-time action gameplay, as well as a strategic tactical way you can be about it at certain times while fighting. The voice acting is really good. There's like one or two voice actors that seem, you know, definitely over the top, but both English and Japanese both convey the sense of emotion, and you know, you're really invested in what's going on, and you really enjoy these characters. I gotten so used to like the original voices for Final Fantasy VII as time went on, you know, such as Steve Burton doing Cloud's voice, or George Newbern doing Sephiroth's voice. It felt a little off when I started, when I heard the new voice come out of Sephiroth, or if I heard the new voice come out of Tifa, oddly enough. I thought Aerith's voice actor was really good. And I've seen her play the game before, and it's actually, you know, she's adorable when she does it, but I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, Sephiroth's voice actor kind of threw me off, although as the game went on, you know, considering that he doesn't really do much throughout the game, he just sort of pops up and says, hey, I'm Sephiroth, I'm here, I'm a fan favorite, so yeah, I'm here. Then when you get to the end game, you get to his boss battle, and he's, you know, doing this speech about, you know, what exactly he wants and what he's doing, and he's trying to actually invite Cloud into the fold, to invite Cloud into his plan. And you know, the voice acting behind this guy is actually really believable. I actually enjoyed it. I did enjoy the voice acting a lot, and yeah, like I said, with Tifa and him, it was kind of like, you know, more of an acquired taste. Barrett still over the top, as he's supposed to be. Briggs and the rest of them. Jesse, I really enjoyed. So, and then of course Cloud's voice. It seems like I said, it's hard for me to get rid of Steve Burton, but I really enjoy this new voice for Cloud. I think he conveys emotion really well.
Slowly, silently, painfully. Can you bear to see the planet suffer? Cloud.
Now let's get down to somewhat controversial part of the video, and that's the story. Now, the majority of the Final Fantasy story, well, if you played the original Final Fantasy, you know pretty much what's going to happen. And seeing how, whereas you spend probably about maybe 20 to 30 minutes in Midgar in the first game, in the original game, you spent about, it took me 60 hours maybe, and you spend the entire game in Midgar. Now, I was a bit surprised by this, although at the same fact, Square-Enix had already said that this game is just part one of a multi-series of games that all is going to take place in Final Fantasy VII. So, it being taken entirely taking place entirely in Midgar didn't really bother me. I don't see how some people were just like completely bothered by that. But I know where they're coming from. I guess if Square-Enix thought if they put a part 1 on the box, maybe it would not have sold as much, and that could be true. Because with dealing with gamers, such things as longevity doesn't really go into account unless it's a multiplayer game. When it's more of a single player story, they tend to just rush right through it. Personally, me, I'm the type of person that takes my time, which is why I have 60 hours plus on the game. You know, that's how much I love the game. And I'm actually going to be playing through it again. Well, after this review, I'm possibly going to be deleting off my system so I can make room for more controversial games. But I did really enjoy Final Fantasy VII, and I'm going to see myself, at least so far, see myself playing it in the near future all over again. Heck, once I finish with this whole Kingdom Hearts 3 thing, I might upload some battles from Final Fantasy VII. That'd be fantastic, wouldn't it? But there are these creatures in 7 that are called the Whisperers, and these are the creatures that seem to separate the fan base a little bit, especially people who really enjoyed the original, such as myself. Now, to me, it didn't bother me, mostly because, if you guys know my channel, if you can't even tell by my username, Sora Not Roxas, I am a huge Kingdom Hearts fan. Kingdom Hearts is my favorite game. So, well, favorite gaming franchise. So when Nomura does something Kingdom Hearts related, and it's, you know, it's a little weird, it's a little out there, we Kingdom Hearts fans are just like, oh, well, this is your first time, huh? Yeah, I'm completely used to this by now. This does not bother me in the slightest. If anything, it's actually more mysterious and more enjoyable. Yes, these hooded figures do get kind of annoying, but as the game goes on, you actually do want to learn just slightly, just a little bit more about them. And every time they appear, you want to know a little bit more about them. Basically, these creatures are here just to keep fate in check, to keep you on your designated path. Excuse me, I can't even speak today. And they're supposed to keep everyone set on this path. And what you're doing is you're changing fate. And how the way this game ends, especially considering that you fight Sephiroth here, which you don't fight him this early. That was actually a big surprise for me. But I was glad, considering that the boss battle before his was kind of lame. It was possibly the only lame boss battle in the entire game. I mean, it's done on a motorcycle, for crying out loud, and it's not the motorcycle battle you're thinking about, the one where you fight the soldier third class Roach, who's an amazing addition, a new character. I absolutely love him. I think he's completely over the top. That's exactly the type of Final Fantasy craziness I'm talking about. It's a fantasy. Have fun with it. This is something that 15 couldn't understand for some reason. Depressing ass game. Anywho, if you don't want to hear too many spoilers from here on, you possibly shouldn't listen to me at this part, so you have been warned. The way the game ends is basically after you fight Sephiroth and defeat him and then end up losing to him in a cutscene. I guess that makes sense because Sephiroth was barely trying in this. The Sephiroth you meet might not actually be the Sephiroth that you're used to. Yes, this is opening up a possibility of multiple dimensions. Like, there are multiple versions of Cloud and Sephiroth and all this. And I was just thinking to myself, hey, that's a good idea. That's one way to connect all the Final Fantasy games together. But you know what that makes me think of? Final Fantasy Dissidia, which has already pretty much done this idea and made an entire gaming franchise about it. But never seen that in like one of the main number series. So this is really interesting. So the remake is basically a full-on remake, or more of a reboot, if anything. And I actually kind of like this. Yeah, I know it may be controversial, but I actually find the fact that I don't know what's really going to happen next, that this possibility open up. I mean, hey, Zack is still alive at this point. Zack, really? The whole fact that Cloud has the Buster Sword and carry on Zack's legacy, that's the whole point of it. But at the same time, these different dimensions are blending together or separating, and you want to know more. You really want to know more. It ends off on a great cliffhanger, and I was actually pissed where the game ends. Not because you stay in Midgard the entire freaking time, or that the new game plus is kind of confusing how they do it, where you just select chapters. No, it's just the sheer fact that I wanted to know more. I was interested in knowing more. And that's where I'm just going to go ahead and just end my little video on. Yeah, I actually really like the Final Fantasy VII reboot. Oh, I'm sorry, remake, even though it's technically not a remake if you're, you know, telling a different story entirely. You're not really remaking the original game, you're remaking the entire story. But I guess that what they was going for. If it was, I can't tell if that's brilliant or just plain deceiving. Or deceivingly brilliant. Yeah, either way, Final Fantasy VII Remake, get a thumbs up for me. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. A 9 out of 10. Heck, even could be a 10 out of a 10. But yeah, there are a couple of boss battles or some voice acting that was a little weak here or there, or the story kind of going at a stalemate at certain points, especially when you go to that labyrinth of lifts where you have to turn on this switch so you can get over there, and you guys know what I'm talking about, that part where you go to section 6. Oh, but we also have to go to section 4, and then we got to go to section 5. It's just it gets kind of annoying, but you want to reach that materia that's over there in section 2, but you can't get to section 2 till you open up section 4, and bloody hell, it was all over the place. Okay, that's about all I got. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. If not, then don't hit the like button. But I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you clicked on the video. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Maybe controversial, but heck, I like it. And I like the original. It didn't ruin the original for me. If anything, it just enhanced it. I like this idea of it being different dimensions, like this one being taking place in a different dimension than the original. Maybe that's why they switched the voice actors. You know, Japan likes to do this. Metal Gear Solid 5 actually did this as well. So, yeah. Great. I love it. Okay, bye.
That which binds us together would be no more, and I would be loath to live in such a world, which is why I must ask you this one favor. Don't worry, it's a simple thing. Run, Cloud. Run away. You have to leave. You have to live. You bastard! Good, Cloud. Very good. Hold on to that hatred.